to tell you stories from India, real stories. Collected, some of this work has been done by my students in the master's program in women's studies, who have done research in 7 states of India to collect real life stories. All the stories come from people who are 18 and above now. We did not interview students, interview children, so to say, but these are stories. I will share some narratives later, but I have these 2 documents which I will leave here for you to look at. These are one of these documents is called Life Stories of Young People. This is the material which has been collected by the students, and the other one is a report which is basically based on these stories. So this presentation in that sense is combining both existing data sets as well as empirical study from which it is drawing, and some observations on human rights violations that are very much there. So I will keep talking to you as I have structured my presentation, and I'll keep talking to you a little bit to explain as I will be showing you this. So I mean, this is a picture of you can see the one sitting in the center are small children who are getting married, and as a usual picture you can see on the internet. But this is not the kind of marriage that is so common in India. Just wanted to say this because often when we talk about child marriage, these pictures come up. This happens especially in Rajasthan, a particular state in India, as well as in other villages. At the same time, this is not what one is only referring to. And there are also group marriages. This is something that you can see, group marriage. In India, we play games when we are young, where we play, I don't know whether you have this here, but we marry the dolls. So it's a little bit like that, parents treating their children like dolls, where group marriages are organized. But what one sees is that child marriage is widely prevalent in India, even though it's forbidden since 1929, and it's only in 2006 that it got criminalized. But how do we define child marriage? And it is defined, there is a differentiation in terms of the age of girls and boys. So marriage before being 18 for girls and 21 years for boys in India gets to be defined as child marriage. Of course, the phenomenon is also common in South Asia, other countries, Sub-Saharan Africa, as well as parts of Latin America and the Caribbean. So we would need a sort of a conceptual clarification so that we are able to understand the problem clearer, is that child and its definition is very much a cultural issue. So in the Indian context, what we may be referring to as child, these young boys and girls are not necessarily seen as children. Puberty is very often seen to define maturity, and there is a certain aspect of being prepared for sexuality and sexual encounters that gets recognized in terms of getting people married, getting so-called children married. So this is like the WHO definition, which is important in terms of recognizing persons below 18 as children. The issue, even though it has this child marriage, somehow has an exotic element to it, at the same time the issue has a global significance, and because of the issue of teen pregnancies, unmarried mothers, sexual and reproductive behavior of children and young people, HIV vulnerability of adolescents and young adults, issues of child rights, sexual rights and human rights violations, etc. I just wanted that to be in your cognizance before we go on with this topic. So it is a difficult phenomenon to study and estimate. People do not readily admit that they got married as a child because they know it is legally prohibited. But at the same time, one of the key indicators to measure the incidence of child marriage is the percentage of currently married women in the age group 20 to 24 years who were married before the legal age of 18 years. So as per the latest data in India, the percentage of women getting married below 18 years is as high as 47.4%. And you see the data is dated 2005, 2006, so that also says something about lack of data in recent years, which actually points to 1 in 2 women in India as child brides. And so what we are referring to is about 23 million women in the age group 20 to 24, and that's a sizable figure, and India is contributing 40% to the world's child brides. What we also see is that over the years there is very little drop in terms of these figures. One other thing to note is that there are many more child marriages in rural areas than in urban areas. So what we do see is that the urban areas are somewhat protective. At the same time, micro studies show that a lot of people living in slums marry their daughters in rural areas, go back and marry their daughters in rural areas to protect them from violence, sexual violence in the slums or in the cities. What we see is that social disparity and inequity is visible in child marriage prevalence globally and nationally. So while the practice concerns on average 1 in 2 women aged 20 to 24 in India, the prevalence is even higher among disadvantaged groups, the poorest families in the rural areas, minority families, for instance, who feel disadvantaged and would like to protect their daughters. Marriage again becomes a sort of a safety measure for girls. It's also seen as a disciplining institution for young boys. There are these 6 states, for those of you who are aware of India, where this is very much rampant, and these are the middle part of the country. And Bihar is the state where we have the highest incidence of child marriage. You can see it's close to 70%. So although the child marriages impact both boys and girls at the same time, the incidence of child marriage is significantly higher among females across generations. And you can see in the definition itself the distinction being made for men as 21 years of age and for women as 18 years, because there is a certain pattern in which marriages get encouraged, where in Indian patriarchal society, marrying a boy who is older than you, better educated than you, is part of the system of making the familial hierarchy of the male. So median age at marriage for both males and females in rural areas is lower than in urban areas. and both men and women in urban areas tend to marry around 3 years later than men and women in rural areas. We also, if we look at religion, we find that the marriages, if we look at Jain, Sikh and Christian communities, then it is significantly higher than amongst Hindus or Muslim communities. So it is the Hindus and the Muslims where child marriages are happening more. There is a strong correlation between education and child marriage, and we see that about 72% of females and 56% males who had child marriages had not received any education. Only 13% females and 16% males who got married before the legal age had completed at least 10 years of education. So what we see is that women with no education are 6 times more likely to get married with those married than those with 10 years or more of education. So we see actually education is a deterrent in terms of child marriage, but we also, micro studies also show that girls' education is discontinued to get them married. So it's much more complex, this relationship with education. And a lot of business families in India would prefer educated brides coming in early because their sons are not educated, so they want the daughters-in-law to perform the function of educating the children in the family, and would prefer these educated girls at the same time with no other function but caretaking of the house. The phenomenon of dropouts that we see in schools and colleges, etc., is also linked, but we do not have a causal linkage. So what I want to say is that there is more to child marriage in structural terms than just a cultural practice. It's not just cultural practice. What one sees is that structurally you have a context within which women are not encouraged to have education. Women are also dispossessed in terms of property rights. Women do not have skills for economic independence, and all this makes for the continuation of a patriarchal system wherein women are subservient, so to say, which begins at the level of the family. And of course, we know from international studies that child marriage is also associated with a range of health-related risks. There are at least 2 girls aged 15 to 19 years in rural areas for every young girl in urban areas who begins childbearing. So, and women younger than 20 years old have higher rates of newborn mortality than women aged 20 to 39 years. So lack of physical maturity and the stress of childbearing and its complications for young girls, also the psychological stress of childcare and motherhood, all these are part of this problem. So very often these child brides are not engaged in any household decision making, because they are given most of the duties of the household and are exposed to abuse. Their sexuality, labor, mobility, all this is highly controlled, and they get isolated because part of the way this system functions is that girls are no longer in their familial context. They don't have access to institutions like educational system and schools, and they are shy even when they are have access to the educational system. They are shy to really be there, as women who are married, and all these make for an acute isolation of these young girls. So we feel basically that these child brides are certainly very weak. So in Indian context, one needs to talk about women's empowerment all through the life cycle, but particularly this is beginning with the child brides. So marriage is a very important institution in India. If one were to talk about parental responsibility, then getting married one's children is one of the most important parental responsibilities. I was just talking to a Swedish friend about what he thinks is a parental responsibility considered in Sweden as very important, and he just said, yeah, he had to think about it, and then he said, perhaps just to get my children to be reasonable adults, have responsibility and humor, and be able to deal with their life's problems themselves. I was thinking it's so different if one were to ask this question of Indian parents. It's the most important responsibility is the marriage of their children. So both men and women, but particularly women. So girls and their marriage is something sitting on the heads of parents as a responsibility which they must address. And you can see how strong emotions are woven around this issue of responsibility. So one has to be culturally sensitive in the fact that just like you had this film Big Fat Greek Weddings, we also have big fat Indian weddings. Parents put a lot of money, they save a lot of money for these weddings for their daughters and also son, but certainly there is a culture of abstinence for this big day, which is cultivated as a responsibility of parents. Many of these girls are also exposed to spousal violence, especially sexual violence, because micro-studies show a lot of marital rape happening in these marriages of young people, young girls, especially who are culturally cultivated to abhor sexual proximity, on the other hand, are married off, and then it's supposed to be okay. So I will say a little bit later about how the culture looks at youth sexuality and sees it only legitimate within marriage. So a little bit about the causes. Birth of girl child is not welcome in Indian families in general, as they are seen to be economic and social burdens, and adolescent girls are particularly vulnerable group, as poor families with scarce resources are not inclined favorably to meet their health, nutrition, education and protection requirements. Moreover, fear of sexual violence and risk to security of the girl child often compels families to marry them off early, before family honor is in any way tarnished. So there's a lot of understanding of family honor being linked to girls' sexuality. Also economic insecurity, disaster situations, insecure environments, they place an acute burden on families with young unmarried daughters, and marriage tends to be seen as a secure arrangement in the face of challenges where daughters may be additionally vulnerable. The situation is also risky for economically disadvantaged populations such as migrant families, minority communities who all see, who perceive aggravated risk for their daughters. Also, we have caste and community norms, and dowry is a significant factor. So one is caste is a sort of a ritual status, a ritual class, if I may use the term, although class and caste are not the same. So marrying a daughter in one's own ritual status group is important. If a daughter marries outside of the caste, then and marries somebody who is in the lower caste, which means is ritually lower in the hierarchy, it is again seen as being in some ways against the honor of the family and the clan. And so that's another sort of an issue which forces parents to not trust their children and to get them married as quickly as possible so that they do not transgress the caste norms. So what we see is that the burden and the negative impact of early child marriage is overwhelmingly played out on adolescent girls who are not only deprived of their fundamental rights to education and health, but also are limited in their freedom to interact with peers or to participate in civic and cultural activities in their communities. School dropouts, poor educational attainment, unwanted early and multiple pregnancies, poor maternal and child health, gynecological morbidities, isolation and aborted psychosocial development of young women who must play the roles of wives and mothers before they age. All this come out of this problem, as well as they are more vulnerable to violence and abuse. And these are problems which are not only girls' problems, but are problems also of families, communities, and society, but do not get recognized as such. So, we did this study where we also looked at different aspects of the problem, and I will share our study, which I just told you about in the beginning. Our study was to capture the lived experiences of young people who married before 18 years and to document their own vulnerabilities and aspirations, to understand what they think were consequences of for them, especially of early motherhood, and understand how child marriage and early pregnancy impacted their health and physical well-being. Also to understand how it intersected in their biography with the experiences of caste, class, religion, regional location, etc. We tried to look at some customary practices because in India this law is existing. At the same time, there are so many customary practices which allow for marriages to happen amongst relatives. So we have marriage forms, for example, marrying one's husband's younger brother in case of his death, which we call levirate. There are marriages of exchange, so families would give their daughter in the same house from where they are taking a daughter. So this is like an arrangement which seems to make for security of the families with respect to each other. There are also practices of kidnapping and elopement, etc., which are culturally sanctioned. So there is, you may have heard about marriages by capture, marriages by elopement, etc., which are sort of encouraged on particular festive occasions, or these are like the events society gives to young people to sort of take lead for choosing their partners, even when otherwise it structures partner exchange in a very strong way. So we also wanted to understand the perceptions and practices of amongst young people and to see their own ideas as agents of change in altering the norm and practice of child marriage and their own visions of society, because the idea was not to only see young people as victims of child marriage, because we found in our research and these stories that many young people actually chose to marry early. They just ran away. So runaway marriages are very common. So it's not just that they are victims of parental decision making. Many of them choose to get married on their own early. Yes?
If they do like run away, is the conditions better, like are the less abuse and that kind of stuff in most marriages?
Yeah, so in hindsight, these people regretted running away, okay, because there was too much pressure on the boys to make a living, and they could not supplement their own education and training. So in hindsight, these people have regretted about it, and the girls also went through early pregnancy. So we found the stories in terms of marriage seem to be very much the same. It was how they were negotiated that there may be a difference, and that's again linked to youth sexuality and how the culture views youth sexuality, where it does not allow youth sexuality outside of marriage. So marriage becomes the vehicle for young people to experience themselves sexually, but at the same time it has this problem of unexpected trajectories of life, or unplanned, let's say unplanned trajectories of life for young people. So we did exploratory studies and focus group discussions where we looked particularly at states where these marriages are common, and we interviewed 42 women and 15 men between the ages of 15 to 29. Our focus was on women, on girls, and these documents which I introduced. So I would just tell you a little bit about our findings. We found all our research participants were aware of the legal age for marriage, yet there was widespread irreverence to this law in rural areas, and so they knew what was the right age, but what they practiced was entirely different. So what they were saying was, when they were defining appropriate age of marriage, puberty, sexual maturity, romance. So if you can love, then you can marry. That was the argument. Dropping out from school due to non-interest means if you're not interested in studies, then get married. That was the argument. So marriage as entertainment, or marriage as as I said, an institution for disciplining. Then there was a sense of marriage itself necessary for physical and mental maturity of individuals. So when also in business families, men started sitting in the business of the household. For example, if they are sitting in the shops, then they are being physically mature, and they can actually, they deserve a wife, so to say, or they now need to enjoy a wife. So and again, the maturity of girls in terms of the readiness to handle familial responsibilities, preparedness to cook and do other household chores. In fact, what we found was that there was a negative perception of those who remain unmarried after attaining the age of 20-21 years. So we actually did not find in rural areas people who would be more than 22 and would not be married. It was impossible to do. We wanted to do a research with those who married later than 22, and we couldn't get a sample. These are some excerpts. I was just thinking you might like to just see what they're saying. When I was 12 years old, my older brother was to get married. I got married in exchange for bride for my brother. My husband's parents were insecure that their son would not find a girl to marry when he was older. Since they were giving a daughter to my house, they insisted I be married to their son. This is what is a marriage in exchange. Household stability depends, it's seen to be dependent on women entering in the house. So if a woman is entering from the other family, my house, I ensure that if she gives me trouble, I can give trouble to the daughter of that house. That's the kind of sort of balancing. Of course, the second one is about about runaway marriage, where parental consent is not there for people marrying on their own. The marriage has to be decided by the parents so that they can control young people in the household. I was not very happy, but my mother was worried about me and she never had anything to pay for my dowry, so she married me. There's another one where when one sister died, I was told that my marriage had been arranged with her husband. I was not asked if I agreed to this decision. I was only told. I just accepted it as my sister's death had disturbed my family. My mother then began preparing me for marriage, but with little enthusiasm. I was too sad about my sister's death. Now I feel responsible for my husband's happiness. I was struck by this narrative talking about husband's happiness. She has nothing to talk about herself. Her main normative understanding is to give a son to this family and to make this family happy. And that shows how we are socializing our girl children, because there's a sense of customs and tradition being above everything else. This was an absolutely strange case. I am the youngest of 4 brothers. All 4 of us were married to 4 sisters in a group wedding. I was only 14 at that time. 3 of my older brothers died by the time I became 22. There were 14 children born to us all in this time. Under family pressure, I had to marry my 3 sisters-in-law, as the children required to be taken care of and family duties had to be observed. But of course, this is an absolute extreme case. This is not usual, but we found such an instance. There are customary practices where one is married to one's mother's brother. Now this brother may be of the same age as the mother or maybe younger, but there is a certain understanding again of giving back a daughter to the same household from where one has taken a daughter, and there is a sense that these marriages will be safe for the daughters. They will not be violent, so they are done in good faith, so to say. At the same time, one can see how it is structurally problematic in terms of contributing to patriarchal hierarchies in the familial system. So we have many customary practices where these traditional marriages, where forms of marriages where which encourage marriage of young people below 18, and religion is sort of upholding them. We also have greater we have beliefs of greater marital stability, reducing the burden of dowry, and protection of violence, protection from violence in such marriages. And but there is no recognition of non-consent in marriages as a human rights violation. And this is what contributes to force some young people to elope and marry out of choice to avoid such marriages. But there are also customs which recognize elopement, and when done under certain occasions, especially amongst tribal groups, then they sort of get social sanction later. So if you have eloped, later the society recognizes the marriage. Once a child is born, or a little later with some sort of retribution, they are able to recognize. But we found in our cases that fear of marriage without consent emerged as a cause for elopement among young people, even those who do not belong to tribal communities. And parental version of this was fear of transgression of sexuality norms by adolescents as reason for marital arrangements in childhood. We also found that marriages by purchase and marriages as a cover for trafficking also emerged in our study. So we found in Bengal, for example, people who are evidently private persons marrying for themselves are actually agents who will sell the young bride into prostitution. So this is actively worked out, this link where they are only sort of removing the girl from poverty-ridden families into the market, flesh market, and nobody is really bothered about these girls because there seems to be parental complicity. They do not find out enough about who they're giving their daughters in marriage to, and girls are ending up in sex work. So need to study how customary practices are being reinvented by youth and older generations to further their distinct intentions, one of control, the other of resistance. We also found, for instance, case of young people going in groups after elopement to get married together at temples. So because they don't have familial support, young people in schools and colleges would decide, okay, this day we just collect here from the villages. They would come to a town like Calcutta, they would collect there, a big city, they would try to get married in the temple and go back and continue to live in their parental homes if possible, but with this understanding between themselves that now they are married and can have sanctified sex. So this is being practiced, or they may go back and tell their parents, we got married and now we live together. And so it is an act of resistance for which they look towards their own friends to support. Most important is that children are being bartered in these arrangements, which are sort of instrumental to girls' and women's subordination in marital households. And there is limited education and employment opportunities to be the biggest restrictions by both men and women. This is what we found. And also young people who marry through runaway marriages, for example, enter into extreme poverty and have lack of possibilities of changing it. So it's sort of, in response to your question, it aggravates their economic challenges. We also had girl brides complaining of malnutrition, weakness due to early and repeated pregnancies, abortions, complications in pregnancy, lack of knowledge of contraceptives, and pressure to give birth soon after marriage, pressure for male children, and routine physical, psychological, and sexual abuse. So I will not go into some of these narratives because they are narratives which are talking about all these. I would like to just go on to the issues of access to issues of law and access to justice before I close, so that we can have more time to talk. So one is that even though it is so rampant, it is talked of as a social evil, but not as a crime. And that's important because we have this act, the Prohibition of Child Marriages Act from 2006, which prescribes a minimum age of 18 years and 21 years for marriage for girls and boys. At the same time, we do not see it implemented in a strong way. Child marriages remain unpunished and common, and there is widespread irreverence to this law in rural and urban areas, and it's just seen as a social evil instead of as a crime. Very few cases get registered and punished under this offense as compared to its prevalence. Then we have this debate going on currently in India with respect to the triple talaq, which is instantaneous divorce amongst Muslims. And one of the things we are talking about is the Uniform Civil Code. And then how do we deal with significant minorities in our context? So we have a situation of many customary forms of marriage being practiced, which are legitimizing these human right violations. At the same time, various courts continue to uphold customary practices and personal laws of different religious communities which govern family matters. And we know that, for instance, within Muslim law, puberty is the appropriate age for marriage. So in that context, what again the cultural definition of what is a child becomes important. And this works against our more universalistic understanding of 18 years as the age which we would like to recognize in terms of recognizing child. So the debate on whether we need to have a uniform civil code where we can actually address discrimination against children and have better legal protection for them from their own communities. Then the issue of whether minors can consent or dissent. We have a legal situation where we say that a child who has been married as a child can, when they grow adult, can put a case and the marriage can be made void. At the same time, the law does not recognize these marriages as automatically void. And that's a problem, because there is an understanding that these marriages are legal if the parties do not have a problem. And that's problematic if we're talking of human rights. So how do we get over this? There is a serious lack of accountability because we have prohibition officers, etc., but we do not have them really functional in all areas. India is a country where law implementation is a big problem. So we need to have the law better implemented and accountability of persons to be strictly sort of monitored. Then we have a whole cultural approach where child sexual abuse in marriage is okay, but consensual sex outside marriage a taboo. So consensual sexual activity among young people below 18 years is considered illegal in India. And although sex with a child in marriage per se is valid, the age of consent for sex has been increased in recent years from 16 to 18. So marriage, as I said, is seen as a solution to youth sexuality, and young people in our study talked of being compelled to marry due to their adolescent love, their parental interference in their romantic lives, and fear of being forced to marry somebody of their parents' choice if they delayed marriage out of their own volition. So patriarchal notions deny access to justice for young people, and what we see is that young boys eloping with young girls consensually, they get routinely charged for statutory rape, so that's another problem. So one of the things we do not have compulsory registration of marriage. So one of the things one is thinking about is registration of marriage as a monitoring and control mechanism, because we don't have this compulsory. And but the problem is, in some states, all marriages, even child marriages, are getting registered. So you find a way of sanctioning these marriages even legally when they get registered, when law is not actually criminalizing it. So officially, India pleads that it is not in a position to eliminate child marriage completely due to high poverty levels, but it's more than poverty. It's the practice of dowry given by girl's family to groom's family. That is an important reason to get daughters married early, and there are various other legislation that need implementing. For example, we have sex selective abortions, we have non-implementation of inheritance rights for girls and women, we have non-implementation of compulsory education till age 18, and non-implementation of marital rape, for instance. All these are important. We have to look at the issue in a more holistic and connected way, and to see child marriage as a crime. And it's not simply a child protection issue. So the government approach, unfortunately, has been lagging in terms of looking at it as a crime, and more trying to look at it in terms of reproductive health, nutrition and education programs for adolescent girls. Because we have to recognize adolescent girls really don't have so much say in the familial context. So there is also an argument that in Indian culture there will be no acceptance for married girls whose marriages in childhood are made void, and whose parents are punished. Therefore, they say we do not need to issue to handle this as a crime, but more sensitively through a softer approach. However, one of the main problems is non-implementation of the various laws by the different stakeholders, and also the lack of thrust on compulsory education, on skill development and employability, etc., so that girls are not seen as burdens, and there are alternative life prospects for girls seen with dignity and autonomy. So what we require is community conscientization and community ownership of legal provisions, and this has to be attempted through responsive monitoring and evaluation system, punitive measures wherever it is needed, and not allowing negligence and a sort of an attitude of not attending to it seriously. We need conscientization of teachers, government functionaries, our local governance, religious leaders, police, etc., where we are able to actually uphold the state's ratification of several international instruments which India is obliged whereby to protect the basic human rights of its children, especially the girl child. This is I think the most important thing. So just in terms of closing, what we need is a multi-pronged approach where we are sort of looking at the root causes of child marriage, and we are looking at it through broadening girls' educational attainment, skill development, livelihood option, general empowerment and sense of agency for girls, also addressing issues of sexuality and rights, sexual health and sexual rights. This is like not at all an issue which needs attending, and a long-term strategy where one is working with young people and communities for change in attitudes. There are some schemes that are there for what we call transfer of cash transfer. So families are given cash to delay their marriage of their daughters, but this does not really work very seriously, because this cash transfer is only seen as a substitute of dowry, and people use the same to give dowry to girls. So in terms of how girls are viewed, there's not really much difference. We also got to know from young people about the need for establishment of young adolescent groups and clubs, girls hostels, vigilance committees, programs on conscientization of life skills, health and hygiene and sexuality education. all of which need focus. And instead of adopting a moralistic and protectionist stance to child rights, we need to recognize young people's agency and rights, which is not what is really happening. Yeah.